In a forgotten gas station on a dusty road, a racist deputy thought he could humiliate a black woman, shove her, kick her down, and walk away like nothing happened. But what he didn't know was that she wasn't just another traveler. She was the FBI chief. And in just 3 minutes, his world, his career, and everything he believed was about to burn. Stay with us because what happens next will leave you breathless. This isn't just a story about survival. It's a story about reckoning. About a storm they never saw coming. If you believe in standing for truth, justice, and change, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and join us as we bring more stories that the world can't ignore. A black woman stops for gas in the middle of a Missouri country road. In 3 minutes, she's knocked out right in front of everyone. But the name on her ID card will burn this entire town down. Don't look away, the storm is just beginning. It was supposed to be just another quiet afternoon along the dusty backroads of Westford County, Mississippi. The sun hung heavy in the sky, stretching golden heat over the cracked rooftops and sagging porches of a town that time had forgotten. Somewhere between the rusted fences and fields of dry corn, a lone gas station clung to life, the kind of place where the soda machines leaned sideways and the paint peeled off the signs like old scabs. Into this forgotten corner rolled a black SUV, its tires crunching over broken gravel. Behind the wheel was Danielle Rivers, a woman in her early 50s, dressed in plain jeans, a gray windbreaker, and mirrored sunglasses that shielded her steady gaze. She looked like just another weary traveler passing through, someone looking to gas up, maybe grab a soda, and disappear before sunset. But Danielle wasn't just anyone. She was the chief of the FBI's Southern Division, a woman who had spent 25 years hunting drug lords, dismantling human trafficking rings, and locking corrupt politicians behind bars. A woman who knew how to survive in the shadows and command in the light. But today? Today, she just wanted to get home. Danielle stepped out, stretched the stiffness from her long drive, and popped the gas cap. She was filling the tank when the sound of tires rolling over gravel shattered the stillness. A sheriff's cruiser pulled in slow, deliberate, the kind of entrance meant to make someone feel watched. The cruiser bore the dusty insignia of the Foster County Sheriff's Department. Its door creaked open, and out stepped a heavy-set deputy with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl carved into his face. His boots crunched across the lot as he swaggered toward her. Deputy Chad Holloway. Danielle didn't flinch. She kept her posture relaxed, hands visible, the perfect picture of calm. She'd heard the sound of approaching boots too many times in her life: Kansas, Tennessee, Arkansas. It was always the same rhythm. "You lost, ma'am." Holloway's voice was rough and sharp, dragging across the air like sandpaper. Danielle turned slowly, measured, every movement designed not to escalate. "Just getting gas," she said, her voice steady but polite. He eyed her SUV with thinly veiled suspicion, his gaze crawling over the vehicle, then back to her, like she must have stolen it. "Let me see your ID," he barked, stepping closer. Danielle held his gaze without blinking, cool as still water. "May I ask what the issue is, deputy?" "The issue," he said, voice dripping with disdain, "is that you ain't from around here. And people driving shiny black trucks don't usually stop at this station." The line had been drawn. Danielle moved carefully, pulling out her driver's license, only her license, not her badge, and handed it over. She wasn't hiding who she was. She just wanted to see how far this would go. Holloway snatched it from her fingers and read the name aloud like it was a curse. "Danielle Rivers," he sneered, spitting the syllables into the dirt. "What are you really doing in Foster County?" Danielle stayed silent for a beat, the late afternoon sun beating down on her back. "I told you." "Getting gas," she repeated, firm but still non-confrontational. And then, it happened. Holloway stepped in closer, so close his badge brushed against her chest. "You got an attitude, Miss Rivers," he growled. "I don't like that." Without warning, he shoved her hard, his meaty hand slamming into her right shoulder, forcing her back against the SUV with a dull thud. "Hey! Danielle barked, catching herself on the doorframe, refusing to stumble. But Holloway wasn't done. He yanked open her passenger door and started rifling through her glove box, tossing aside receipts, sunglasses, even a protein bar, like he had every right in the world to invade her space. "My registration's right on top," Danielle said, voice tight, trying to de-escalate. Holloway found it, crumpled it in his fist, then turned back to her with a look of pure contempt. And then before she could even brace herself he kicked her. Hard. Straight into her shin with the steel-toed tip of his boot. The crack echoed across the lot like a gunshot. Danielle gasped, falling hard onto the gravel. The sharp stones tore into her palms, ripped through her jeans, sending a jolt of white-hot pain up her leg. Her gas pump clattered to the ground, fuel dripping steadily onto the concrete. Holloway stood over her, a smirk playing on his lips. "That's where you belong," he said, voice low and cruel. "Stay down." And just like that, he turned his back and started sauntering toward his cruiser, boots crunching over the gravel without a care in the world. But Danielle Rivers wasn't the kind of woman who stayed down. Teeth gritted, fighting back the burning in her knee, she pushed herself up, one palm braced against the scalding gravel, her jaw clenched against the pain. Blood trickled from her shin, soaking into the denim, but her face remained carved from stone. Across the lot, unnoticed, a teenage boy who had been stacking crates outside the gas station held his phone low, lens tilted up, recording every second. Holloway either didn't see or didn't care. He slammed the cruiser door and peeled out of the lot, dust and gravel spitting behind him like an insult. Danielle stood there alone, the heat shimmering off the pavement, her chest heaving not from fear but from fury. She bent down, picked up her driver's license, and brushed it off with hands that only trembled slightly. Her phone buzzed deep in her pocket. One glance at the screen changed everything. Director Olson, head of operations. Danielle answered, her voice like steel wrapped in silk, "This is Rivers." "You okay?" came the voice on the other end, sharp and tight. "We just flagged a geo alert." "Something happened at a gas station?" Without hesitation, Danielle replied, "Deputy assaulted me." "It's all on a civilian's phone." There was a pause. Then, "We're pulling Holloway's full record. Complaints, discipline history, everything. Stand by." Danielle hung up and slipped her phone back into her pocket. She smiled, then not from amusement, but from the deadly calm of someone who knew the storm she'd just unleashed. Across the lot, the teenager was still recording, the phone trembling slightly in his hands. Danielle met his eyes, calm, unyielding. "Send that to the news," she said softly, voice like a match poised to ignite a fire. The boy nodded, eyes wide. Danielle limped the last few feet to her SUV, her hands scraped, her knee throbbing, but her spine unbroken. Kyle Holloway had just kicked the wrong woman. And he was about to learn that the hard way. In less than 3 minutes, everything he knew, his badge, his career, his entire world was about to go up in flames. The footage hit the internet like a match thrown onto dry brush. At first, it was just a shaky video, 15 seconds of horror. A sheriff's deputy shoving a woman, digging through her car, and then, with sickening cruelty, kicking her to the ground like she was nothing. The woman's face wasn't immediately recognizable. Not yet. But the sound of the boot connecting with her shin, the way she gasped, collapsed, and the smug look on the deputy's face that was unmistakable. Within an hour, it had been reposted across local Missouri Facebook groups. By noon, it hit TikTok. By 1:30 p.m., it exploded across Reddit, Twitter, and Instagram. By nightfall, millions had seen it. And they were furious. Meanwhile, inside a small roadside diner 20 miles away, Danielle Rivers sat in a cracked leather booth, nursing a black coffee and a bruised shin. She scrolled through her phone as the storm gathered force online. She watched it build with calm precision, the same way she used to watch criminal networks crumble during federal raids. Only this time, the operation wasn't run by agents, it was fueled by millions of angry citizens who had seen enough. Her own inbox buzzed non-stop, encrypted pings from the bureau, private messages from field agents, journalists sending desperate requests for comment. She ignored them. For now. Because timing was everything. Outside the diner's grimy window, a battered news van screeched into the gravel parking lot, antenna rattling, doors flying open. They were already here. Across the county, Deputy Chad Holloway was blissfully unaware. At the Foster County Sheriff's Office, Holloway sat in the break room, sipping bad coffee and laughing about another damn city slicker causing trouble. His co-workers snorted along with him, some pretending not to know better. The footage hadn't reached them yet. Not officially. But Danielle knew, it was only a matter of minutes. Because truth on the internet moves faster than cover-ups ever can. By the time Danielle paid for her coffee and stepped back outside, her name and the deputies were trending nationally. The hashtags #JusticeForDanielle and #KickbackAgainstCorruption roared across social media platforms. One particular frame. The exact moment Holloway's boot struck Danielle's shin, her body folding toward the ground, became the symbol of the entire movement. It wasn't just a video anymore. It was a call to arms. Danielle's phone buzzed again. It was Director Olson. His voice was tight, clipped. "We've pulled Holloway's record," he said without preamble. "You're not going to like it." "Tell me," Danielle said, sliding into the driver's seat of her SUV. 4 prior complaints. 2 excessive force allegations involving black men under 30. 1 Latina nurse pulled over and allegedly assaulted. All swept under the rug by his supervisor. Danielle's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "And the supervisor?" "Sheriff Martha Caulfield," Olson said grimly. 3-term incumbent. Backed by local businessmen. Tight with the county commissioners. Danielle closed her eyes for a beat. It was never just one bad cop. It was always the system built to protect them. "And one more thing," Olson added. "Body cam footage from today has been flagged as missing. It's conveniently unavailable." Danielle exhaled slowly. Of course it was. "They're going to bury this if they can," Olson said. "Not if we move faster," Danielle replied, her voice low and sharp. "Danielle," Olson started, but she cut him off. "Pull the internal complaints. Financial ties. Procurement contracts. Every string Sheriff Caulfield ever touched." There was a pause. Then Olson answered simply, "Copy that." Danielle killed the call and stared out across the shimmering heat of the empty road. This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. It was about every person like her who had been pushed down, kicked aside, and told to stay silent. Today, the system kicked the wrong woman. And today, that system would learn what it meant to bleed. At that exact moment, halfway across town, the teenager who had filmed the assault Tyson Moore was nervously clutching his cracked Android phone. His mother hovered behind him, wringing her hands. On the screen, the video had already been reshared 78,000 times. He could barely believe it. Messages poured into his inbox, journalists, civil rights lawyers, activists offering to help. Tyson knew he had filmed something important. But he didn't know it was about to change everything. By nightfall, CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News were running the story on loop. A shocking video surfaces showing a Foster County deputy assaulting an unarmed woman at a gas station. Sources now indicate the woman may have ties to federal law enforcement. Danielle smirked as she heard the report playing from a nearby TV at the gas station where she stopped for more fuel. May have ties, she thought grimly. They had no idea yet. But they would. Very soon. Inside the Foster County Sheriff's Office, Sheriff Martha Caulfield slammed her office door shut as her staff scrambled to contain the inferno. "Get me Holloway," she barked into the phone. And find that damn body cam footage. But it was already too late. The footage lived in 1,000 places now, copied, backed up, reposted, memorialized. The cover-up was dead before it even started. That night, Danielle didn't sleep much. Instead, she sat cross-legged on the motel bed, laptop open, mapping out every thread she intended to pull. The county's rotten budget allocations. The deputies with buried complaints. The local businesses funding Caulfield's campaigns. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place. Not because Danielle had started it, but because they did. Because in less than 3 minutes, on a dusty gas station lot, Deputy Chad Holloway had kicked more than just a woman. He had kicked the door wide open on a broken empire. And now? Danielle Rivers was going to burn it all to the ground. By the next morning, Foster County wasn't just trending, it was under siege. News vans clogged the dirt roads. Reporters jostled for position outside the sheriff's department. Protesters with handmade signs chanted for justice along the courthouse steps. And in the middle of that growing firestorm, Danielle Rivers moved like a shadow, calm, calculating, relentless. She wasn't just chasing Chad Holloway anymore. She was hunting the disease that had kept him protected for years. Inside a borrowed FBI satellite office 2 towns over, Danielle sat before a battered laptop, a stack of files, and a whiteboard already filling with names and red lines. Her knee still throbbed, the bruises a constant reminder. But pain was fuel now, not a hindrance. Across from her, Marcus Hayes, her longtime ally from Bureau Intelligence Coordination, slid a thick manila envelope across the table. "You're not gonna like this," he said grimly. Danielle didn't flinch. "Tell me." Marcus opened the file and began. Chad Holloway. 6 years with Foster County Sheriff's Department. For official complaints for excessive force, all closed internally. No disciplinary action taken. Danielle's jaw clenched. And Sheriff Caulfield? Marcus flipped the page. 3-term incumbent. Re-elected with no opposition. Financial ties to 2 local construction firms, and 1 private security company that supplies surveillance gear to the county jail. Danielle narrowed her eyes. Money. It always came back to money. And it gets worse, Marcus continued. Internal audits show missing equipment reimbursements, overbilling on prison food services, and, he tapped the page for emphasis, multiple settlements paid to victims who later withdrew their complaints. Silence stretched between them. Danielle leaned back, studying the mess unfolding before her. "This isn't a few bad apples," she said flatly. Marcus nodded. "It's a spoiled orchard." "Exactly." Meanwhile, inside the Foster County Sheriff's Department, Sheriff Martha Caulfield paced her office like a caged tiger. The building buzzed with tension. Deputies whispered in corners. Phones rang off the hook. News crews crowded the front lawn. And the footage of Holloway's assault kept playing on loop across every major network. Caulfield slammed her fist against her desk. "Find me a way out of this," she barked at her second-in-command, Lieutenant Don Briggs. But there were no easy exits now. Not when the world was watching. Back at the satellite office, Danielle pulled up the list of dismissed complaints against Foster County deputies. Names repeated. Dates overlapped. One pattern was impossible to ignore: every complaint had been reviewed and dismissed by the same internal affairs officer. Sergeant Paul Kinney. "Find Kinney," Danielle ordered. "I want his personnel file, his financials, his last 5 years of activity logs." Marcus was already dialing. Danielle tapped her pen against the table, mind racing. If Kinney had buried complaints, and Caulfield had protected him, then they weren't just negligent. They were complicit. That afternoon, another bombshell hit the media. CNN ran an investigative piece exposing the systematic suppression of misconduct complaints within Foster County. Whistleblower interviews. Former deputies coming forward. Civil rights attorneys demanding DOJ intervention. The public pressure cranked up another level. Sheriff Caulfield issued a bland, tone-deaf statement on Facebook, citing her deep concern and promising to conduct a thorough internal review. It fooled no one. Not the journalists. Not the protesters. And definitely not Danielle. Late that night, Marcus returned to the motel where Danielle had set up a temporary base. He dropped a second envelope onto the bed. "Kinney's clean on the surface," he said. "But cross-reference his mortgage records with his wife's business account?" Danielle arched an eyebrow. Marcus smiled grimly. "They bought a second property last year cash right after Holloway's last complaint disappeared." Danielle's lips curled into a razor-sharp grin. There it was. The first crack. Proof that the corruption wasn't random. It was profitable. But just as Danielle began sketching out her next moves, a burner phone buzzed in her pocket. She answered without hesitation. It was Tyson Moore, the teenager who had filmed the original assault. His voice trembled with adrenaline. "Miss Rivers, you gotta see this. I found another video." Danielle's blood turned to ice. "Another video?" "Yeah," Tyson whispered. "It's from 2 months ago. Same gas station. Different black guy. Holloway roughed him up too. Slammed him against a wall." Danielle's heart hammered. Patterns. Always patterns. "Send it to me now," she said, keeping her voice calm. Within minutes, the video appeared in her encrypted inbox. Danielle watched it in grim silence. Same setting. Same casual brutality. Same smirk on Holloway's face. Only this time, there was no one to step in. The man Holloway assaulted was later arrested for resisting arrest, charges that now looked completely fabricated. Danielle didn't wait. She called Marcus over. "We're not just fighting a deputy or a sheriff anymore," she said, voice deadly low. "We're fighting a machine." "And Holloway?" Marcus asked. Danielle smiled without humor. "He's just the tip of the spear." As the clock struck midnight, Danielle sat at the motel desk, a storm raging silently inside her. Foster County wasn't broken. It was engineered to protect itself, to silence victims, to breed men like Chad Holloway and shield women like Martha Caulfield. But the shield had cracked now. And Danielle Rivers? She was going to rip it wide open. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. And Foster County wouldn't survive what was coming. Morning in Foster County was heavy, not just with summer heat but with the weight of something inevitable. The courthouse stood in the distance, small and grim against the blazing sky, its steps already filling with restless crowds, journalists jockeying for position, activists threading through police barricades, locals craning their necks for a better view. Danielle Rivers pulled her black SUV up to the curb, stepping out with a stiff leg and eyes that burned sharper than any siren. She didn't pause to adjust her jacket, didn't waste a breath. Marcus Hayes was already waiting at the base of the courthouse steps, clipboard tucked under one arm, his face grim. "It's bigger than we thought," he muttered, but Danielle only gave a slight nod, her fingers brushing over the badge clipped openly to her belt. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Chief of Southern Division," and kept moving, the muted chant of protest signs and the whir of cameras following her every step. Inside the courthouse, Sheriff Martha Caulfield watched from an upstairs window, pale and silent, hands knotted into fists so tight they trembled. She could see the wave coming. She could see the center of it, Danielle, limping slightly, head high, walking straight into the fire without a flinch. And there was nothing Caulfield could do to stop it anymore. Danielle reached the podium precisely at 10 o'clock. The noise dipped, the air thickened. She let the silence stretch for a second longer than comfortable, staring out at the wall of lenses and microphones and faces, and when she finally spoke, her voice cut through the courthouse square like a scalpel. "My name is Danielle Rivers. I am the chief of the FBI's Southern Division. I have spent the last 25 years of my life dismantling criminal networks, rooting out corruption, and fighting to defend the justice this nation claims to stand for. A ripple moved through the crowd, something between recognition and awe, but Danielle pressed forward without pause. 2 days ago, while traveling through Foster County, I was physically assaulted by Deputy Chad Holloway. I was shoved, searched illegally, kicked to the ground without cause, without warning, without the slightest justification. She let that land, heavy and brutal, before continuing, her voice harder now. But this, she gestured out toward the town beyond the courthouse steps, this is not about me. It is not about one bad deputy. It is about a system. A structure built to shield men like him. A culture designed to bury complaints, to silence victims, to protect itself at the cost of every principle it claims to uphold. She leaned closer to the mic, her words striking like hammer blows. And that structure leads straight to Sheriff Martha Caulfield. A shock ran through the crowd, snapping like an electric pulse. Reporters surged forward. Locals gasped openly. Marcus, standing nearby, tensed visibly, knowing exactly how dangerous naming Caulfield outright would be, but Danielle didn't blink. She continued, every word a blow. Today, I am announcing that the Department of Justice has opened a federal civil rights investigation into the Foster County Sheriff's Department. I initiated it. I will oversee it. And it will not stop until every thread of corruption is unraveled, no matter how deep, no matter how protected. The cheers broke loose then, rolling across the square in waves, chanting, shouting, fists raised into the hot, bright air. Cameras caught every second. Phones live-streamed the moment onto millions of screens across the country. Danielle stepped back from the podium, ignoring the barrage of shouted questions. Was she pressing personal charges? Would Caulfield be suspended immediately? Was the sheriff's entire leadership team under review? She gave them nothing but a sharp look, a slight nod, and turned back down the courthouse steps, Marcus falling into step beside her without a word. You just lit the fuse, he said low as they moved, the sound of the crowd swelling behind them. Danielle didn't smile. Not really. It was something colder, sharper, something that lived somewhere deeper than triumph. No, she said. The fuse was already burning. I just made sure everyone could hear it. Across town, Chad Holloway nursed a beer in a dimly lit bar, staring up at the TV mounted over the counter. Danielle's face flashed again and again, her words slicing through the air like a knife. He gritted his teeth as patrons around him muttered and cast glances his way. Not admiration. Not solidarity. Disgust. Fear. Holloway's stomach turned to stone. He understood, in a way he hadn't before, that Danielle wasn't just coming after him. She was coming after everything. By the time Danielle and Marcus climbed back into her SUV, the DOJ had already sent encrypted pings to Marcus's burner. Subpoenas were being drafted. Internal affairs audits were underway. Emergency federal oversight meetings had been called. The machinery of accountability, rusty, reluctant, and slow, was grinding to life, and Danielle Rivers was the hand forcing it forward. As the SUV rumbled away from the courthouse, Danielle stared out through the windshield at the courthouse dome receding into the distance. Not a symbol of justice anymore, but of a rotted empire about to fall. Online, the movement blazed brighter. Hashtag Justice for Danielle. Hashtag Break the System. Hashtag Foster County Cover-Up. Hundreds of thousands of tweets. News stations interrupting their broadcasts. Protesters vowing to stay on the courthouse steps until indictments were announced. Inside the sheriff's office, Martha Caulfield slammed her office door hard enough to rattle the glass. She screamed at her deputies to find a way to stop the bleeding, but none came. There was no stopping it now. Not when the world had seen. Not when the cracks had burst wide open. Danielle Rivers didn't celebrate. She didn't rest. She simply drove on into the heat of the day, knowing that tomorrow would be worse. That retaliation would come. That they would smear her, threaten her, come for her reputation, maybe even her life. But she didn't care. She wasn't fighting for her badge anymore. She was fighting for the very idea that power could be held accountable, and she intended to win, no matter the cost. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with sirens. Sometimes it walks into town with a limp, stares down the system, and says, "I'm not leaving." The sun had barely slipped below the horizon when the first real strike came. Danielle Rivers was sitting in her motel room, the same room where she had mapped out the fall of Foster County, when the lights flickered once, twice, then snapped off entirely. The hum of the cheap air conditioner died into silence. For a second, the room felt like a sealed box, the heat pressing in from all sides, the darkness heavier than it should have been. Danielle didn't panic. She moved instinctively, reaching for the flashlight she had placed near the bed, clicking it on with one smooth motion. The narrow beam of light sliced across the room, and that's when she saw it. A shadow moving outside the window. Low. Quick. Watching. She stayed low, slipping the burner phone into her pocket and grabbing the laptop. Every instinct screamed at her, they're not just watching anymore, they're moving. She didn't wait for confirmation. She moved to the bathroom, wedged herself between the door and the wall, heart steady, breathing measured. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then a sharp crack of gravel outside. Tires screeching. A car pulling away into the night. Danielle waited a beat longer before emerging. When she opened the door to her room, a small package sat just outside, hastily dropped. She didn't touch it. She didn't have to. Even from the doorway, she could read the thick black letters scrawled across the front, "Stay silent or stay dead." It was sloppy intimidation. Sloppy and desperate. She kicked the package back inside with the toe of her boot and immediately called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "They're escalating," she said, voice low. "I need extraction." "Quiet." "Already 2 steps ahead," he replied. "I'm outside." "Move." Danielle grabbed the essentials burner phone, laptop, encrypted drives, and left everything else behind. She didn't even glance back at the motel as she slid into the passenger seat of Marcus's beat-up pickup truck. As they pulled away, a black SUV idled 2 blocks down, windows dark. Danielle didn't point it out. She didn't need to. Marcus had already seen it. They drove in silence for a long while, headlights cutting across deserted backroads, the town of Foster County shrinking behind them like a bad memory. Finally, when the tension in the air eased just slightly, Marcus spoke. "They're scared." Danielle nodded once, fingers drumming against the battered dashboard. "Good. That means they'll start making mistakes." Marcus glanced at her, a shadow of a grin on his face. "You have a plan?" Danielle didn't smile. She just said, "Of course." The next morning, while the sheriff's department was scrambling to contain the media firestorm, Danielle and Marcus holed up in a borrowed safehouse, an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the woods, off any grid that Caulfield's people could track. It wasn't much, a single room, battered furniture, a rickety antenna barely strong enough for secure uplinks. But it was enough. Enough for what they needed to do next. Danielle spent hours piecing together the next strike. She pulled up financial records Marcus had scraped from public databases, cross-referenced them against campaign donation logs and procurement contracts. Patterns emerged, ugly and predictable. Sheriff Caulfield wasn't just negligent, she was orchestrating a pay-to-play empire under the cover of small-town law enforcement. Construction companies building inflated projects. Surveillance vendors billing for equipment that never arrived. Bail bond companies tied to deputies' family members. Every string Danielle pulled revealed another knot of rot. But exposing it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed betrayal from within. Marcus made the call to an old contact, Deputy Sam Velasquez, once loyal to the department, now quietly pushed to the sidelines after filing a harassment complaint that mysteriously disappeared. Danielle didn't need to convince him much. When they met in the empty parking lot behind a shuttered diner, Sam's face was tight with anger barely concealed beneath his ball cap and sunglasses. "I've got files," he said. "Body cam footage they buried. Payment logs. Emails. You name it. Why help us now?" Danielle asked, watching him carefully. Sam's jaw tightened. "Because I believed in the badge once," he said bitterly. "Not this. Not this filth." He handed over a flash drive, and with it, a piece of the noose that would tighten around Caulfield's neck. Danielle didn't celebrate. She didn't even thank him. She simply nodded and said, "Stay low. They're going to start panicking soon." He understood. He disappeared into the night without another word. Back at the safe house, Danielle and Marcus worked through the night, building what she called the avalanche, a layered timeline of corruption, abuse, financial fraud, and buried misconduct stretching back nearly a decade. Every document sourced, every accusation cross-checked, every name connected to another. When it was done, Danielle stared at the web sprawling across her laptop screen, the sheer magnitude of it sinking into her bones. This wasn't just a scandal. This was a systemic rot that stretched beyond Foster County, touching state contracts, political donors, federal grants. They wouldn't just try to silence her now. They would come for her with everything they had. And she was ready. By dawn, Danielle loaded the compiled case into an encrypted dead drop and sent copies to 3 trusted journalists, 2 civil rights attorneys, and 1 federal oversight office. She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any byline ever could. Marcus looked over from the window where he had been keeping watch. "You think it'll be enough?" Danielle closed the laptop softly. "It's not about enough," she said. "It's about inevitable." Later that morning, news broke like a dam bursting. National networks picked up the leaked files. Major papers ran front-page spreads. Anchors spoke her name now with weight and respect and fear. Foster County wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a reckoning. And Danielle Rivers wasn't hiding. She was standing in the middle of it all, daring them to come at her. Because the truth had found its voice. And this time, it would not be silenced. By the time the sun clawed its way over the tree line, Foster County was no longer a sleepy corner of America, it was a battlefield. News choppers circled the courthouse like vultures. Protesters camped out on sidewalks, chanting slogans painted hastily onto cardboard signs. Every channel, every feed, every conversation from the local diners to Washington, D.C. buzzed with one name, Danielle Rivers. And behind closed doors, the people who had spent years tightening their grip on this county were scrambling like rats on a sinking ship. But rats don't go quietly. They gnash, they bite, they strike when they're desperate. Danielle knew it was coming. She just didn't know how soon. It started small. A leak manufactured email suggesting Danielle had doctored evidence, incited unrest, targeted Foster County for personal revenge. Anonymous sources feeding the media whispers about her being unstable, angry, too emotional for leadership. Cheap shots. Predictable. Danielle barely blinked when Marcus showed her the headlines. "Let them talk," she said, voice flat. "Every second they waste smearing me, they're not plugging the holes in their own sinking ship." But she knew it wouldn't stop there. When power feels itself slipping away, it stops playing games. It gets dirty. And late that night, as she sat reviewing surveillance footage Deputy Velasquez had handed over, the dirty part arrived. The first warning came not through her phone but through the sharp crack of gravel outside the safe house. Danielle killed the lights instantly, heart rate spiking but mind icy calm. Marcus moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. A black SUV idling at the tree line. No headlights. No plates. "They're here," Marcus said, voice low. Danielle nodded once. Time to spring the trap. Because she hadn't just spent the last few days exposing them. She'd been preparing for this moment. She had invited it. Earlier that afternoon, Marcus had circulated a quiet rumor through back channels. Danielle would be meeting with a federal DOJ investigator tonight at the old Claiborne courthouse, a condemned building half an hour west of Foster County. She would have documents. Hard drives. Flash drives. Everything needed to bring the sheriff's department and its network crashing down. It was bait. Bait she knew they couldn't resist. Marcus and Danielle moved fast. They grabbed the decoy briefcase loaded with blank drives and prefabricated files convincing enough to fool a desperate, panicked hit squad, and slipped out the back of the cabin under cover of darkness. They left the lights on, left the laptop screens glowing. From the outside, it would look like they were still inside, oblivious, waiting for the ambush. Let them waste their anger on an empty house. The drive to Claiborne Courthouse was silent except for the rumble of tires on broken asphalt. The building itself loomed ahead like a ghost-cracked stone, boarded windows, a place forgotten by most of the county. Danielle and Marcus parked a block away, moving on foot under the cover of trees. By the time they reached the courthouse steps, they were ghosts themselves, slipping into the darkness inside, setting up the hidden cameras they'd planted earlier. Every angle of the rot that was about to walk through the door would be captured. Every word. Every crime. They didn't have to wait long. Just after midnight, two vehicles rolled into the cracked parking lot, a black SUV and a battered pickup. Three men climbed out, two armed with radios, the third cradling what looked like a crowbar. No uniforms. No badges. Just violence wrapped in civilian clothes. Danielle watched from the third floor, heart steady, pulse slow. She saw the way the men moved, quick, jittery, angry. She saw the glint of metal tucked into waistbands. She saw them kick the side door open with a grunt and start sweeping through the building, hunting for her. She let them get close. She let them find the decoy briefcase, saw the way one of them hooped quietly like they'd won some prize. And then, just as the tallest one barked, "Grab it, let's move," the front doors burst open with a crash. Federal agents swarmed in, body armor gleaming, rifles raised, voices barking commands sharp and lethal. FBI. Hands where we can see them. The three men froze, confusion and terror blooming across their faces, too late to save them. Within seconds they were on the ground, cuffed, disarmed, caught red-handed on federal surveillance. Danielle stepped out from the shadows then, her badge clipped firm at her belt, her face carved from stone. She walked past the men who had come to silence her, not sparing them a glance, and approached the lead agent. "Evidence secured?" she asked crisply. The agent nodded. "All of it. Their radios, their phones, the briefcase. Cameras got everything." Danielle simply said, "Good. Send it all to Washington. Tonight." Marcus met her at the exit, a rare grin breaking across his face. "Worked like a charm," he said. Danielle's expression didn't change. "They thought they were hunting me," she said. "They didn't realize they were already prey." Back at the safe house, or what was left of it, local deputies sent by Sheriff Caulfield had discovered too late that they had broken into an empty, wired, monitored crime scene. More footage. More evidence. More nails for the coffin. And as the sun cracked the edge of the world the next morning, national news outlets were already airing grainy footage of the arrested men being hauled out of the Claiborne courthouse. But Danielle Rivers wasn't watching the news. She was already 3 moves ahead, staring down the next mountain she would have to climb. Because taking down a few foot soldiers wasn't enough. She wanted the architects. She wanted the people who built the system. And now, finally, she had the momentum she needed. In Foster County, the sheriff's office scrambled. Caulfield issued a mealy-mouthed statement about rogue elements and unfortunate misunderstandings, but the words sounded hollow, even to the people saying them. Inside the sheriff's department, deputies started whispering, looking over their shoulders, wondering who would be next to fall. Danielle didn't slow. She gathered the files Deputy Velasquez had hidden away. She built a master case file so damning, so airtight, that not even the most corrupt judges in the state could bury it. She wasn't aiming for an indictment anymore. She was aiming for a systemic collapse. Because she knew something they were only just realizing now. Truth, once unleashed, doesn't just reveal. It destroys. And Danielle Rivers was just getting started. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It started with whispers, quiet, sharp-edged things moving through the hallways of the Foster County Sheriff's Department. Deputies side-eyeing each other. Phones buzzing late at night with panicked texts. Office doors closing tighter. Files disappearing from unlocked drawers. Sheriff Martha Caulfield tried to hold the center, barking orders, demanding loyalty, but loyalty was a currency she had long since spent. Those who had once turned a blind eye to her abuses were now scrambling to save themselves. And Danielle Rivers? She was the one tightening the screws, one file, one interview, one broadcast leak at a time. The footage from the courthouse sting dropped across national news by noon. It played over and over, 3 men cuffed on the courthouse floor, Danielle's badge flashing as she moved past them like a force of nature. No context needed. The image was enough. That afternoon, a second video surfaced, this time leaked by an insider at the sheriff's office, showing deputies laughing as they reviewed the body cam footage from Danielle's assault days earlier. No official response came from Caulfield's office. None would. They had no defense left. Marcus Hayes sat across from Danielle at the cabin, laptop open, monitor glowing with maps, financial records, and confidential personnel files. "It's falling apart faster than we thought," he said, tapping a folder marked, "Priority Witnesses." 3 deputies have already contacted federal oversight offering testimony. Caulfield's command staff is splitting down the middle. Danielle didn't look up. She was reviewing another set of wire transfers routed through shell companies tied to Foster County's procurement contracts, money laundering in plain sight. "Good," she said simply. "The more they fracture, the faster the collapse." But Danielle knew better than to underestimate a cornered animal. Desperation bred recklessness, and Martha Caulfield wasn't the type to go quietly into disgrace. Sure enough, late that night, Marcus caught a flagged transmission on one of their surveillance taps, encrypted chatter between known associates of Caulfield's re-election campaign. Phrases like, "contain the fallout," "make it personal," "neutralize the threat," floated across the screen like poison clouds. Danielle watched the words scroll by, face carved from stone. "They're going to escalate," Marcus said grimly. Danielle nodded once, slowly. "Let them." The next morning, Foster County woke to a fresh scandal. A whistleblower dumped thousands of internal emails showing a coordinated effort to destroy civilian complaints, fake evidence in court cases, and misappropriate federal grant money meant for community policing initiatives. Within hours, the Department of Justice announced an emergency expansion of its investigation into not just the sheriff's office but the entire Foster County government infrastructure. City officials resigned. Judges recused themselves. Contracts were frozen. And still, the center could not hold. Sheriff Caulfield tried to claw back control, standing stiff in front of local cameras with a hastily written statement, blaming bad actors and outside agitators for the unrest. But even as she spoke, her voice faltered. Behind her, 2 of her senior deputies' faces grim, arms crossed, refused to nod along. The public saw. The media saw. Danielle watched it all unfold from the cabin, sipping bitter black coffee, the edges of her mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. It wasn't over, not yet, but it was beginning to tilt, and once the weight of truth leans hard enough, no fortress can stay standing. Then came the real break. A sealed subpoena Danielle had filed quietly through DOJ channels landed hard on Caulfield's office, a full financial audit, dating back 10 years, targeting not only Caulfield herself but also her brother-in-law's construction company, her niece's private security firm, and a network of phantom charities laundering kickbacks. Marcus handed her a flash drive later that night. "You'll want to see this," he said. Danielle plugged it into the laptop, heart steady. What she found made her pause, just for a second. It wasn't just Caulfield. Buried inside the financial records was a name she hadn't expected to see: State Senator Edward Mallory, a political titan in Mississippi, long considered untouchable. Contributions, private meetings, discreet favors, policy protections, it all linked back to Foster County, to the corruption festering there, protected not by local loyalty but by the shield of state power. Danielle leaned back, exhaling slowly, feeling the magnitude of it press against her chest. This was bigger than one sheriff. Bigger than one crooked county. She wasn't just pulling down a rotten tree. She was about to expose the entire rotten forest. Marcus watched her, reading the change in her eyes. "You sure you want to go this far?" he asked quietly. "This could get real ugly." Danielle closed the laptop with a sharp, final snap. "It's already ugly," she said. "We're just finally holding up a mirror." That night, as rain drummed low and steady against the cabin roof, Danielle drafted a new operation plan. It wasn't about Foster County anymore. It wasn't about revenge or even justice for herself. It was about system-wide exposure, root and branch, no matter how high the infection reached. She wrote the first names on a clean sheet of paper. Senator Edward Mallory. Sheriff Martha Caulfield. Deputy Chad Holloway. And she left space beneath each name, because she knew more would follow. Outside, thunder rumbled low on the horizon. A storm was coming. But Danielle Rivers wasn't afraid of storms. She was the one who had called this one down from the heavens. And she wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. Danielle Rivers didn't sleep that night. She sat at the cracked wooden table in the safe house, rain hammering against the windows, laptop open before her like a battlefield map. Lines drawn, targets marked. Every keystroke was another blow against the fortress they had built around themselves for decades. By sunrise, she had the outline of her assault finalized. Foster County was just the beginning. The rot spread deeper, higher. State Senator Edward Mallory was the next domino, but he wouldn't fall to leaks and outrage alone. Men like Mallory had armor layers of plausible deniability, connections inside oversight committees, allies embedded in federal and state agencies alike. To bring him down, she needed a scalpel, not a hammer. Marcus pulled up just as the sun broke through the gray clouds, a battered duffel bag slung over his shoulder, face hard with purpose. "Ready to burn the house down?" he asked. Danielle simply stood, slid the final flash drive into her jacket pocket, and said, "No more slow leaks. No more warnings. We take the whole damn roof with us." They didn't return to Foster County. They drove straight east, past the muddy rivers and crumbling motels, toward Jackson, the state capital, Mallory's stronghold. It was a 3-hour drive that felt like 3 minutes, both of them running scenarios in their heads, planning contingencies without speaking. By noon, Danielle was sitting across from Denise Hampton, a federal prosecutor she trusted more than anyone alive. Denise had fought alongside her before corruption cases, human trafficking busts, dirty judges always outnumbered, never outgunned. Danielle laid out the files in silence, letting the data speak first: money trails, illegal contracts, fake grants, secret payments, all roads leading back to Mallory's campaign fund. Denise flipped through the evidence slowly, her face unreadable until she reached a series of emails dated just 2 months ago, where Mallory's aide explicitly referenced containing exposure risk in Foster County and maintaining loyalty at the sheriff level. Denise's hand stilled over the paper. When she looked up, her eyes were cold steel. "This is enough to bury him," she said. If it sees daylight. Danielle's smile was a grim thing. It will. They moved fast after that. Danielle knew the window was small. Mallory's people would sense the pressure tightening and would move to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, maybe even disappear key players. The plan was simple and ruthless: force the Department of Justice's hand by staging a controlled leak so massive, so undeniable, that Washington itself would have to act. They weren't asking for permission anymore. They were forcing accountability. By late afternoon, encrypted files were already spreading through trusted networks: independent journalists, nonprofit watchdogs, federal clerks willing to take risks when no one else would. Danielle personally handed one flash drive to a veteran journalist known for surviving assassination attempts in war zones. "You won't be safe after this," Danielle warned him. The man smiled like he had been waiting his whole life for a fight like this. "Neither will they," he said, pocketing the drive without hesitation. The first story dropped that evening. The headline alone sent shockwaves through the Capitol: State Senator Edward Mallory linked to Foster County corruption network, DOJ sources confirm investigation underway. Within an hour, Mallory canceled his scheduled town hall meeting. By morning, federal agents raided his campaign headquarters under a sealed warrant Danielle had helped build behind the scenes. But it wasn't enough to arrest Mallory's cronies. Danielle wanted Mallory himself in cuffs, and she wasn't going to get there by playing defense. She needed someone inside. That's where Marcus came in. Disguised under a contractor's badge, he slipped into one of Mallory's known support offices, an off-the-books logistics hub supposedly dealing with community outreach. What he found there was worse than they imagined: hidden ledgers, burner phones, coded receipts leading back to anonymous PAC donations tied to privatized prison contracts. Foster County hadn't been a fluke. It had been a template, a proving ground for a system Mallory planned to expand statewide. Marcus got out just before Mallory's men swept the building, files smuggled out in a battered laptop bag. They met in a dim parking garage 2 blocks from the Capitol building, Marcus breathing hard but grinning. "Got everything," he said, tossing the bag into Danielle's hands. She didn't hesitate. She uploaded the contents to 3 mirrored servers across different continents, built to survive shutdown orders and cyber attacks. For the first time, they had Mallory's entire operation mapped out, and the public would see every corner of it. That night, as Danielle stood watching the skyline burn with flashing sirens and news helicopters, Marcus leaned against the battered truck beside her. "He'll come after you personally," Marcus said. "Not through lawyers. Through people who don't need court orders." Danielle didn't flinch. "Let him," she said. "I'm not hiding." They both knew what was coming next: the retaliation, the smears, the threats whispered into the dark. Mallory's reach was long, and now she had made herself a direct threat to his survival. But Danielle Rivers didn't back down from pressure. She thrived on it. Every move they made from this point forward would be in the open, unrelenting, impossible to silence without drawing more blood. She stood there, staring at the night for a long moment, feeling the weight of what they had started settle across her shoulders. Not fear. Not regret. Just certainty. This wasn't a campaign anymore. It wasn't even a crusade. It was a full-blown war against the structures that protected men like Mallory, that had buried men like Holloway, that had insulated women like Caulfield for decades. And Danielle Rivers wasn't here to ask for change. She was here to force it, no matter the cost. No matter how many walls they built to stop her. Because some storms don't pass. Some storms tear down everything that was never strong enough to stand in the first place. And Danielle Rivers was the storm they never saw coming. The first strike came just before midnight. Danielle Rivers was sitting at the edge of the safehouse bed, flipping through the last batch of evidence when the glass shattered behind her, a rock crashing through the window with a heavy, sickening thud. She didn't jump. She didn't scream. She moved low, fast, sweeping up the pistol from under the mattress while Marcus snapped off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. They knew it would come. They just didn't expect it tonight. From outside, the roar of an engine pealed into the night as a black SUV tore down the gravel driveway, its taillights vanishing into the woods. Marcus crouched beside the window, peering out carefully. "No license plate," he said, voice tight. Danielle picked up the rock with gloved hands. A paper was taped to it, hastily scrawled in thick black ink, "You're done. Leave, or be buried." Danielle stared at the words for a moment, memorizing the sloppiness, the panic underneath the threat. They were getting desperate. Good. That made them stupid. They didn't wait for morning. Within 10 minutes, they had packed everything, laptops, drives, weapons, and disappeared into the night, leaving the safe house to the shadows. No more hiding. No more running. Danielle wasn't playing defense anymore. They headed south, deeper into backroads and forgotten places, moving like ghosts. By the time the first faint streaks of dawn cut across the sky, they were tucked into a forgotten motel in the middle of nowhere, a place so anonymous even the roaches seemed uncertain about staying. Over greasy coffee and cold toast, Marcus laid out the next phase, Mallory's retaliation network. "We mapped their movement patterns from the office logs and burner call records," he said, pushing a battered laptop toward her. "Private security firms. Off-duty officers. Political enforcers." Danielle studied the screen, noting names, patterns. "They're hiring muscle," she said. "Not just threats. They want an example." Marcus nodded grimly. "They want you bleeding before the cameras. They want to send a message." Danielle leaned back, the motel chair creaking under her. She wasn't afraid. She was focused. She had spent her career hunting predators who thought violence could erase the truth. This wasn't new. It was just the final, inevitable stage of exposure. "Fine," she said quietly. "Let them come. We'll make sure they're the ones who disappear." They spent the next 2 days setting the trap. Danielle leaked false intel through trusted contacts, a fake meeting scheduled at a supposed neutral location, a small municipal building outside Jackson. It was bait, deliberate, obvious, just tempting enough for Mallory's men to act on it. Meanwhile, the Real operation moved forward in silence. Marcus and a trusted handful of agents set up concealed surveillance rigs around the building, high-angle cameras, encrypted mics, a full perimeter lockdown just waiting for the first sign of blood. The night of the fake meeting, Danielle sat alone on a bench outside the building, hair tied back, jacket zipped high, looking every bit the vulnerable target she knew they wanted her to be. Her eyes never stopped moving, scanning windows, reflections in puddles, the faint flicker of a cigarette down the alleyway. She could feel them out there. Wolves scenting blood. Closing in. It happened fast. 3 men emerged from the alley, faces hidden under ball caps, hands buried deep in jacket pockets. They didn't hesitate. They moved with the lethal certainty of men who had done this before, violence compressed into muscle memory. Danielle didn't move. She waited until they were within 20 feet before tilting her head slightly, as if noticing them for the first time. That was the signal. Marcus's voice crackled low through her earpiece, "Green light." From the darkness, agents swarmed. Flashbangs burst in brutal white light. Commands roared over the chaos. Within seconds, the 3 men were face down on the asphalt, wrists zip-tied, weapons scattered uselessly at their feet. Danielle stood slowly, brushing dust from her jacket, walking past them without a word as they were hauled away into waiting vans. Inside the lead attacker's pocket, agents found a burner phone already primed with a message draft, unsent but damning, "Target secured. Bring vehicle around." No media. The recipient? A contact traced directly back to Mallory's private security director, a man with deep ties to 3 lobbying firms currently under federal scrutiny. The evidence was a smoking gun and Danielle wasn't about to waste it. By morning, the footage was all over the news. masked men arrested while attempting to abduct a federal officer under direct investigation for exposing systemic political corruption. The headlines roared, "Federal agent targeted in retaliation, plot linked to state senator." Mallory issued a furious, hollow denial, standing stiff in front of microphones, voice trembling with suppressed rage. Baseless accusations. Political witch hunts. An attack on due process, he spat. But no one believed him anymore. His own party distanced themselves. Donors fled. Staffers resigned in the dead of night. The walls he had built around himself were crumbling faster than he could patch them. Danielle stood in front of the mirror that morning, tying her hair back into a tight knot, bruises fading from her hands but the fire in her chest burning hotter than ever. Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes tired but steady. "They'll come again," he said. Danielle nodded. "Let them. Every bullet they fire, every lie they scream, every desperate move they make, they dig their grave deeper." The war wasn't over. But now, for the first time, Danielle wasn't just surviving it. She was winning it. And when this was over, she wasn't just going to expose one senator, or one county, or one system. She was going to tear the entire rotten machine down. Brick by brick. Name by name. Lie by lie. Until there was nothing left of the fortress they thought would last forever. And she would do it not because it was safe, or easy, or even winnable. But because some fights choose you. And when they do, you don't run. You stand. You fight. And if necessary, you become the reckoning. The day of reckoning didn't come with sirens or flashing lights. It came with a hush that fell over the Capitol like the stillness before a thunderclap. Danielle Rivers stood at the back of the federal courthouse, her badge clipped firm at her belt, the weight of everything they had built pressing against her spine. She could feel it, the momentum, the inevitable fall, the silent breath the world took before a fortress crumbled. Beside her, Marcus adjusted his jacket, his face carved from granite. Across the street, news vans lined the sidewalks, their antennas stabbing the sky. Protesters waved signs demanding justice. Senators ducked into black SUVs, faces pale and tight. Edward Mallory was inside already, summoned under sealed federal subpoena, forced into a hearing he could no longer dodge. Danielle didn't move as the minutes ticked by. She had learned patience from the worst kind of predators. Let them sweat. Let them twist. Let them feel the weight of inevitable consequence pressing down like a tombstone. Inside the courthouse, the room buzzed with muted chaos, reporters whispering into recorders, aides scrambling with folders, security agents posted at every door. And at the center of it all sat Edward Mallory, in a navy suit sharp enough to cut glass, but with sweat beading at his temples, hands clenched tight on the table in front of him. When Danielle entered, silence followed her like a second skin. She walked past rows of staring faces without acknowledging them, her heels clicking sharp against the marble floor. Mallory's eyes found hers almost immediately, a flicker of hatred flashing across his carefully neutral face. Danielle didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She simply sat down across from him, placed a single thick dossier on the table, and waited. The federal attorney started reading the charges: racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to obstruct justice, retaliation against a federal officer, but Danielle barely heard the words. She watched Mallory instead, watched the subtle ways his posture shifted, the way his right hand trembled just slightly when the allegations about Foster County surfaced. She wasn't here for the reading of charges. She was here to see the moment he realized he was finished. It came midway through the evidence presentation when the footage played on the projector, grainy but clear, showing Mallory's private security detail coordinating the failed abduction attempt on Danielle outside the municipal building. His signature voice in the intercepted communications ordering containment at any cost. His fingerprints all over every dirty dollar and every silenced witness. Mallory's jaw tightened. His eyes darted to his lawyer, who leaned in urgently, whispering a stream of advice that grew more frantic by the second. Danielle said nothing. She let the storm build. Because the real blow hadn't landed yet. That came when the prosecutor dropped the final piece: the direct financial link between Mallory's re-election fund and Sheriff Martha Caulfield's slush accounts, connecting Foster County's corruption directly to the heart of the state's political elite. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters scrambled to relay the explosion to the outside world. Marcus, standing at the rear, allowed himself the briefest, sharpest smile. Danielle leaned forward then, her voice low enough that only Mallory could hear it. "You thought you could bury the truth," she said. "You thought you could bury me. But the thing about rot is, once it starts, it never stays hidden. It spreads. And now you're going to drown in it." Mallory said nothing. His face had gone the color of ash. By the time the hearing adjourned, the world outside had shifted. Arrest warrants were issued. Offices raided. Political allies disavowed him in frantic press releases. The mighty Senator Mallory, kingmaker of the South, was now just another defendant, another corrupt man stripped bare under the brutal light of exposure. Danielle didn't celebrate. She didn't smile for the cameras. She walked out of the courthouse into the blinding sunlight, shoulders back, eyes forward, as chants erupted from the crowd: chants of justice, of change, of a system cracking open at last. Marcus joined her, his presence solid and steady at her side. "It's done," he said. Danielle shook her head once. "No," she replied. "It started." Because even as Mallory fell, Danielle knew this wasn't the final battle. Foster County was just the first infection site. Mallory was just the first name. The deeper she dug, the more names she would find: officials, judges, businessmen, people who thought themselves safe behind layers of money, fear, and power. But none of them were safe anymore. Because the truth had teeth now. And Danielle Rivers was leading the hunt. That night, back in the motel room where it had all begun, Danielle sat by the window, staring out into the humid Mississippi darkness. The city pulsed with distant sirens and the restless hum of change. She opened a fresh file on her laptop. Titled it simply, Phase 2. And under that title, she began typing names. One by one. Calm. Methodical. Relentless. Outside, a storm rolled in, heavy with electricity, thick with the scent of rain. Danielle watched it come, felt it in her bones, and smiled, not the smile of victory, but the smile of a soldier who knows the war isn't over. It's just moved to a bigger battlefield. And she was already there, waiting. Because storms like this? They don't just pass. They break the world and build a new one in their place. Danielle Rivers didn't savor the fall of Edward Mallory. She didn't linger in the headlines or bask in the chants of protesters outside the courthouse. She moved. Quietly. Ruthlessly. Because she knew better than anyone that removing a figurehead didn't kill the machine. The machine adapted. It shifted faces, replaced uniforms, whispered to the next ambitious puppet hungry enough to believe the rot could be hidden again. Danielle wasn't interested in tearing down one man. She was interested in burning the whole machine to the ground. And to do that, she needed more than evidence. She needed an army. The first meeting was small. 5 people sitting around a battered table in the back of a rundown library that smelled of dust and old victories. No cameras. No badges. Just resolve. Marcus Hayes was there, of course, his loyalty already tested in fire. Beside him sat Denise Hampton, the federal prosecutor who had risked her career by pushing through Mallory's warrants when others hesitated. Across from them was Deputy Sam Velasquez, the first man from inside Foster County to put truth above survival. Next to him, a tech specialist from the Department of Justice, quiet and sharp-eyed, who had siphoned off the critical server files before anyone realized they were compromised. And at the end of the table, a journalist whose stories had kept public pressure boiling when bureaucrats tried to slow-walk the investigation. Danielle didn't waste time. She laid out the new map names, contracts, hidden shell companies across the cracked wood, pinning them down with old coffee cups. "This isn't just about Foster County," she said, voice low but electric. "It never was. It's statewide. Federal. Connected through PACs, grants, unreported donations, shadow companies. It's a pipeline." She tapped the names pinned across the center. "And it's not broken. It's thriving. Growing. Unless we cut the root." The faces around the table hardened. No one spoke. No one needed to. They had all seen it, lived it, fought pieces of it alone. Danielle was offering something different, a chance to fight it together. The plan was simple in theory, brutal in execution. They would build a decentralized network of trusted operatives, whistleblowers, journalists, ethical prosecutors, tech specialists, each focused on specific pressure points. Targeted leaks to trusted outlets. Lawsuits strategically filed in jurisdictions outside the corrupted courts. Federal complaints backed by overwhelming public documentation, impossible to bury without scandal. And where possible, exposure so bright, so public, that no backroom deal could kill it quietly. Danielle called it Operation Lantern. Because the only thing corruption fears more than consequences, she said, is visibility. Over the next 2 weeks, they built it piece by piece. Safe houses were established under fake identities. Burner phones rotated daily. Secure servers in undisclosed locations mirrored every file, every recording, every testimony. Danielle worked 20 hours a day, coordinating interviews, reviewing financial audits, coaching terrified whistleblowers through the first steps of standing against men who had once seemed invincible. Meanwhile, Foster County itself was tearing apart. With Mallory gone, Sheriff Martha Caulfield faced her own implosion. Federal marshals had raided the sheriff's office. Deputies flipped, turning state's witness in exchange for immunity. Internal memos leaked to the press, painting Caulfield as a dictator propped up by political promises and dirty money. Within 3 weeks, Caulfield was arrested. Frog marched out of her home in handcuffs while cameras rolled, her once-iron control crumbling into public humiliation. Danielle didn't watch the footage. She didn't need to. She was already looking beyond it, tracing the veins of rot to the next set of players who thought the fall of Mallory and Caulfield would end the storm. They were wrong. One night, while reviewing a new batch of leaked correspondence, Marcus leaned over her shoulder. "You're building something bigger than any case we've ever run," he said, a quiet awe in his voice. Danielle didn't look up. She kept scrolling, each new name another link in the chain she intended to wrap around the neck of the system itself. "I'm not building a case," she said. "I'm building a firewall. Against them. Against what they think they can keep getting away with." By the end of the month, the network had grown to 23 confirmed operatives embedded in key agencies, state houses, nonprofits, and media outlets. Operation Lantern wasn't just an idea anymore. It was alive. And it was spreading. But Danielle knew the machine wouldn't go down without fighting back harder. More attacks came, smear campaigns painting her as a radical agitator, planted articles questioning her past cases, thinly veiled threats whispered into the ears of sympathetic politicians. Anonymous messages filled her inbox, veiled warnings, fake job offers, the occasional photo of her walking down the street, taken without her knowledge. She didn't flinch. She moved forward. For every dirty trick they played, Danielle shone the light brighter, pushing documents, recordings, depositions into public view faster than the machine could suppress them. For every whisper of doubt they seeded, she had testimony from another voice who once feared speaking up but now stood because Danielle had stood first. The world was shifting, slowly, like a glacier carving new rivers into stone. And Danielle Rivers wasn't just navigating the current anymore. She was the current. One night, standing on the rooftop of a safe house overlooking the Mississippi skyline, Marcus handed her a cold bottle of water and said, "You realize this is bigger than any one arrest now, right? This is movement territory." Danielle took a long drink, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. She stared out across the city lights flickering like scattered stars and said, "Good. That's what they should be afraid of." Because it had never been just about punishing the guilty. It was about forcing the system to change or dragging it kicking and screaming into the light. And Danielle Rivers was ready to kick harder than they ever dreamed possible. The next target was already in her sights. And this time, it wouldn't be a county. It would be the whole damn state. The first real retaliation came not from a thug in a dark alley or a shadow trailing her car, but from polished corridors lined with marble and history. Within days of Operation Lantern's expansion, the counterattack began. Anonymous audits. Whispers in backrooms. Senators suddenly questioning the legitimacy of the evidence Danielle and her team had unearthed. Talking heads on cable news spinning carefully planted narratives, that Danielle Rivers had overstepped her authority, that she had become a dangerous radical, a threat to national stability. It was coordinated. It was methodical. It was desperate. And it meant they were afraid. Danielle watched it all unfold with the cold detachment of someone who had been waiting for the empire to strike back. She didn't retreat. She doubled down. Every attack was countered with receipts, emails, bank statements, testimonies, contracts with signatures that no amount of spin could erase. She forced their hand at every turn, refusing to let the narrative be written without blood drawn from both sides. But she knew this level of pressure wasn't coming from old relics like Mallory's crowd. No, this was bigger. Smarter. The rot had deeper roots than she had imagined, roots that stretched into federal agencies, state legislatures, corporate boardrooms. A shadow network built not just to protect itself, but to expand. And now, sensing true danger for the first time, it was coming for her with surgical precision. One morning, Marcus handed her a manila envelope, his face tight. Inside were surveillance photos Danielle at a coffee shop, at the courthouse, outside her safe house. Taken within the last 48 hours. Slipped under the door of one of their dead-drop locations like a calling card. No words. No demands. Just a message, "We see you. We can reach you. Anytime." Danielle set the envelope down carefully, her expression unchanging. "Good," she said. "Let them look. Let them watch. They can't stop what's coming." The network grew faster now, fueled by their fear. Whistleblowers who had once been paralyzed by terror came forward, emboldened by the collapse of Mallory and Caulfield. Journalists dug deeper, no longer content with surface scandals. DOJ attorneys, emboldened by public outrage, reopened cases that had sat gathering dust for years. Danielle moved through it all like a conductor leading an orchestra of controlled chaos, every note played louder, every revelation cutting deeper into the machine. But the empire was bleeding too, and wounded beasts are the most dangerous. Threats escalated. 2 key witnesses were harassed into hiding. Another was found dead under suspicious circumstances, ruled accidental within hours. Danielle didn't grieve publicly. She didn't hold vigils or speak to cameras. She filed the names away in a private list she carried close to her heart and moved faster, harder, knowing every delay cost lives. Then came the summons. A private, informal meeting requested by powerful figures under the guise of negotiation. It was a trap, and Danielle knew it. But she went anyway, because sometimes you don't dismantle a fortress from the outside. You walk straight through the front gates. The meeting was held at an anonymous conference center off a dusty interstate, under the pretense of discussion. Danielle walked in alone, unarmed except for the fire in her chest and the armor of 1,000 truths. Around the long table sat men and women who had once moved governors like chess pieces, who had signed deals worth billions in quiet corners of the capital. Their faces were calm, practiced. Smiling sharks. The offer was simple. Walk away. Retire early. A consulting position at a nonprofit. A comfortable salary. Silence. In return, Operation Lantern would be allowed to exist on a leash, controlled, managed, reduced to an empty gesture that wouldn't threaten the true power structures. Danielle listened without interrupting, letting them weave their polished lies and promises. When they finished, she stood, picked up the thick folder of evidence she had brought with her, and said one word, "No." Shock flickered across a few faces, quickly masked. But Danielle saw it. The flicker of something they hadn't felt in years, fear. She turned to go, pausing at the door just long enough to glance back. "You should have offered that 10 years ago," she said quietly. "Before we had cameras. Before we had servers outside your reach. Before we had the people." She smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was the smile of a hammer just before it breaks bone. "Now you can only run. And you can only fall." She walked out into the sunlight, unafraid, the weight of the world pressing down harder but her stride lighter than it had ever been. Behind her, the old world shook. Because the truth was no longer a whisper hidden in dark corridors. It was a flood. And Danielle Rivers was riding the crest of the storm. They had tried to co-opt her. They had tried to threaten her. They had tried to erase her. And they had failed. Now, there was only one path left for them: fall. Hard. And soon. Danielle Rivers stood at the heart of the storm she had unleashed. The morning sun glared off the marble steps of the state capitol, illuminating a crowd thicker than anything the city had seen in a generation. Protesters packed the streets shoulder to shoulder, waving banners, chanting her name alongside the names of the fallen, the betrayed, the silenced. News cameras tracked every movement, satellite trucks lining the boulevards like battle tanks. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't chaos. This was war, and it had been meticulously planned. She stood behind a simple podium, no official seal, no grand insignia, just wood and a microphone and the unrelenting power of the truth. Marcus Hayes stood at her flank, Denise Hampton at the other, both steady, both silent. Behind them, the Operation Lantern network moved like a living thing: activists, whistleblowers, journalists, prosecutors, survivors, all knitted together by a single belief that power unchecked must be burned down and rebuilt. Danielle adjusted the microphone, the murmur of thousands falling into a tense, breathless quiet. She spoke without notes, her voice cutting clean through the morning air. "For too long, this state, our state, has been ruled by shadows," she said. "By men and women who thought money could replace justice, who thought fear could silence truth. They were wrong." Murmurs rippled outward like aftershocks. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every word was a hammer. She laid it out clean: the documents, the emails, the bank trails, the blackmail operations disguised as charity work, the judges bought for the price of campaign contributions. She named names. Full names. Senators. CEOs. Sheriffs. Board members. Lobbyists. She released everything, every carefully hoarded secret, every dark corner scrubbed raw and exposed to the brutal light of day. Screens behind her flashed open record screenshots of wire transfers, transcripts of calls, photographs of secret meetings in luxury resorts paid for by taxpayer dollars. No rumor. No conspiracy. Just hard, bleeding fact, stacked so high that no amount of spin could tear it down. The crowd roared, a sound like a tidal wave smashing against the stone walls of the old regime. Inside the Capitol, panic spread like fire through dry timber. Phones rang off the hook. Aides scrambled. Press secretaries fumbled for statements that hadn't yet been written. Behind closed doors, the surviving power players clawed at each other, desperate to distance themselves from the collapse. But it was too late. Danielle had kicked down the doors and let the fire inside. The Operation Lantern network synchronized the next phase perfectly. Documents dropped onto encrypted public servers mirrored across continents. Lawsuits were filed in multiple jurisdictions within the hour, targeting individuals and institutions too entangled to escape. Public petitions exploded into hundreds of thousands of signatures demanding resignations, audits, indictments. But Danielle wasn't naive enough to think exposure alone would finish it. She knew they would fight back. Smear campaigns ramped up instantly, old personal details twisted, former colleagues paraded across cable news to question her motives, shadowy figures hinting at unresolved issues from past cases. But Danielle had prepared for this too. Every accusation was met with swift, brutal facts. Every lie countered by live documentation, by whistleblowers willing to stand and testify in public. Operation Lantern moved faster than the machine could adapt, flooding the airwaves, social media, public hearings. Every attempt to muddy the waters only shone a brighter light on the truth. And the people responded. For every smear, there were 100 voices raised in Danielle's defense. For every whisper campaign, there were marches in new cities, protests at new offices, letters flooding into federal agencies demanding action. Danielle wasn't a figurehead. She wasn't a politician. She was a force, an idea, a living rebuke to every system that thought itself untouchable. Late that night, Marcus found her on the roof of their safe house, overlooking the city still vibrating from the aftershocks of the day's revelations. He handed her a cold bottle of water, his face split between exhaustion and something like awe. "You realize," he said, voice low, "you just ripped the mask off the whole damn system." Danielle took the bottle, her hands steady, her mind sharp despite the adrenaline still crackling under her skin. She stared out at the lights below, each flickering window a sign of lives being changed, decisions being questioned, illusions shattering. "I didn't rip it off," she said quietly. "They tore it themselves. I just made sure everyone could see it." Marcus laughed once, rough and short. "They're going to come harder now. You know that." Danielle nodded. "Good. Let them. That means they're bleeding." She turned back toward the skyline, feeling the future bending, reshaping under the weight of truth forced into the open. She wasn't naive. She knew the machine wouldn't die quietly. It would claw, it would slash, it would try to bury the truth under distractions, fear, violence. But Danielle Rivers wasn't here to survive. She was here to win. And when the fires burned down the old world, when the smoke cleared and the ruins cooled, she would still be standing. Not because she was invincible, but because she refused to kneel. This wasn't just a reckoning anymore. This was a revolution. And Danielle Rivers had just fired the first true shot. The hit came 3 days after Danielle Rivers lit the match under the state. She had known it was coming. Not just the smears, not just the whispers or the legal threats, but the raw, desperate violence that happens when men in power realize they are losing the only thing they ever cared about. It didn't arrive in the dead of night with masked figures and black vans. It came on a quiet afternoon, when the air was thick with the heat of late summer and the city streets pulsed with the restless energy of change. Danielle was leaving a safe house near the industrial district, her backpack slung over one shoulder, laptop tucked against her side. Marcus was supposed to meet her at the next intersection. She crossed the street, eyes scanning automatically, every muscle coiled tight. She didn't see the shooter until the first glint of sunlight caught the barrel. High window. Abandoned warehouse. Wrong place to pause. The first shot cracked the air like a whip. Danielle dropped instinctively, rolling behind a battered mailbox, the bullet shattering concrete inches from her head. People on the street screamed, scattered. A second shot punched through the box, grazing her jacket. She didn't freeze. She moved. Fast, low, zigzagging toward the alley, heart hammering but mind sharp. Another shot, wide this time, panicked. They weren't professional. They were desperate. Marcus's truck roared around the corner, tires shrieking against asphalt. Danielle sprinted the last 20 feet, diving into the passenger seat as Marcus slammed the gas without a word. Bullets pinged off the tailgate, but the distance stretched quickly behind them. They drove without headlights, without a plan, without breathing, until the city's skyline was a dim glow in the rearview mirror. 20 minutes later, they pulled into an abandoned parking garage, the stink of oil and concrete wrapping around them. Danielle sat still for a moment, chest rising and falling steadily. Marcus was gripping the wheel hard enough that his knuckles were bone white. Finally, he spoke. "You okay?" Danielle checked herself, scrapes, bruises, adrenaline surging like wildfire but otherwise intact. "Fine," she said shortly. "They missed." She turned to him, eyes cold as steel. "But they won't next time unless we end this." Marcus nodded once, silent agreement. They weren't going to report it. They weren't going to file paperwork or wait for bureaucratic sympathy. They were going to strike back, fast and hard, before the machine could reload. That night, Operation Lantern moved into its most aggressive phase yet. Danielle and Marcus combed through security footage, traffic cams, public feeds. Within hours, they had a grainy image of the shooter, a hired gun linked to a private security contractor notorious for, off-the-books, cleanup jobs tied to political operatives. Not coincidentally, the same firm that had received inflated contracts under Mallory's administration. Danielle made the call herself. She didn't go through official channels. She didn't trust them anymore. She leaked the shooter's face, name, and contract details to every journalist on their trusted list, every activist network hungry for blood. By morning, the man wasn't just a threat, he was a hunted fugitive, his face plastered across every screen, his employers frantically denying knowledge as federal warrants rained down. And Danielle wasn't done. Using financial forensics from Operation Lantern, they traced payment transfers not just to the shooter, but to 3 senior political aides still operating quietly behind the scenes, trying to salvage what was left of the old power structure. Within 48 hours, 2 were arrested. The third tried to flee across state lines and was intercepted at a gas station before he made it out of Mississippi. The machine had fired its bullet. Danielle had caught it midair and thrown it back with a force they hadn't prepared for. By the end of the week, the Senate Oversight Committee convened an emergency session, subpoenas flying toward every corner of the collapsed empire. Resignations poured in like rain. The governor, desperate to distance himself from the carnage, issued a public statement vowing a full overhaul of state law enforcement and procurement systems. And at the center of it all, Danielle Rivers stood unbowed, unbroken. They had tried to kill her. They had failed. And now they had something far worse to fear than a lone woman with a badge. They had to fear a nation awake, furious, and finally watching. Because Danielle Rivers wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was building something unstoppable. And the storm she had called down? It was only just beginning to roar. The final blow wasn't delivered in secret, behind closed doors or whispered through hallways heavy with smoke and old promises. It happened in broad daylight, under the searing Mississippi sun, where no one could look away. Danielle Rivers stood at the center of it, right where she had always intended to be. No badge shielding her, no bureaucracy to hide behind, just the truth laid bare and a crowd too large, too angry, too awake to be manipulated anymore. The rot had clung longer than she expected. Even as Mallory fell, even as Caulfield was dragged from her home, even as private contractors burned their files and judges ducked for cover, remnants of the old empire had tried to survive. They pushed new faces forward, clean ones, marketable ones, hoping to convince the public that nothing deeper needed to change, that this was a storm that could be weathered with a few resignations and a few public apologies. They were wrong. Danielle had not spent months bleeding truth into the veins of a sleeping state just to watch it slip back into comfortable lies. She had mapped every connection, every fund transfer, every whispered promise, every silent betrayal. Operation Lantern hadn't slowed. It had grown teeth. And now, with the evidence woven tight and airtight, she was ready to pull the last thread and watch the whole tapestry collapse. The final target was the governor himself. A man who had smiled for cameras while signing reform bills with one hand and signing backdoor pardons with the other. A man who had quietly approved grants funneling millions to shell companies connected to Mallory's fallen empire. A man who thought he was untouchable. Danielle didn't accuse him in a press release. She didn't leak rumors to the media. She handed over a full, documented, ironclad case to a federal grand jury, bypassing every state mechanism poisoned by decades of corruption. And when the indictment was handed down, it wasn't with a whisper. It was a thunderclap that shook the Capitol itself. News broke live, anchors scrambling to keep up as charges flooded in conspiracy, obstruction of justice, misuse of federal funds, racketeering. Cameras caught the moment the governor was escorted out of his private residence in cuffs, his face slack with disbelief, his wife sobbing into a monogrammed handkerchief. Danielle watched it all unfold from a nondescript hotel room across town, Marcus by her side, Denise pacing the narrow floor with a phone pressed to her ear, coordinating the legal tsunami already moving toward the rest of the survivors clinging to the old machine. "You did it," Marcus said quietly. Danielle shook her head once, the muscles in her neck taut. "We opened the door. They have to walk through it themselves." And they would. The people who had marched in the streets, who had voted in record numbers, who had refused to look away even when it was easier to pretend it was theirs now. The fire had spread beyond her hands. Still, the empire fought to its last breath. Smear campaigns multiplied. Hacked emails appeared trying to discredit Operation Lantern, trying to sow doubt about Danielle's integrity, about her methods. Pundits screamed across cable news about chaos, witch hunts, radicals tearing down good men. But every lie ran headfirst into a wall of undeniable truth. Every attack only made the fire burn hotter. Danielle didn't flinch. She pushed harder. She took to the airwaves herself, not with talking points or carefully polished narratives, but with raw, unfiltered reality. She spoke about the dead ends she had been shoved into. About the witnesses silenced. About the cost of standing up when it would have been easier to kneel. About why none of it mattered as long as a single hand remained clenched around power built on suffering. She spoke, and the world listened. Not because she was loud. Not because she was perfect. But because she was unbreakable. And because when truth stands in a storm long enough, even the mightiest towers fall. Within a month, the political landscape was unrecognizable. New special elections were called. Emergency oversight committees launched. Federal investigators embedded across state agencies. Reform wasn't a word anymore. It was an action. And it was happening because one woman had refused to sit down when she was told. Had refused to bow when they aimed bullets at her head. Had refused to forget when they begged her to move on. Danielle Rivers didn't win because she was the strongest. She won because she was the last to give up. Because some battles aren't about who's right or wrong. They're about who stands when everything else burns away. And Danielle stood. On the steps of the Capitol, weeks after the last arrests, a quiet ceremony was held. No grand speeches. No parades. Just a simple plaque placed near the entrance. It didn't bear her name. It didn't need to. It simply read, "Here, truth did not yield." Danielle stood for a long moment, reading it, feeling the weight of it settle into her bones. Not pride. Not vindication. Just the steady, quiet knowledge that the world she had fought to change had, at least for now, shifted. Marcus stepped beside her, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, a rare, quiet smile pulling at his mouth. "What now?" he asked. Danielle looked out over the city she had helped wake, over the people walking faster, standing taller, seeing clearer. "Now," she said, voice steady, "we make sure they never forget. Because the fight for truth never ends. It only changes hands." And Danielle Rivers would be there, every step of the way. A storm they could never outrun. A fire they could never extinguish. A reckoning they would never forget. 3 years later, the world Danielle Rivers helped ignite was still smoldering, reshaping itself under the fierce weight of new eyes that refused to blink anymore. The old power structures had crumbled, the names once whispered in fear now etched in public record books under the grim heading of disgraced. Foster County was no longer a cautionary tale. It was a lesson. A turning point. In classrooms, in law schools, in community halls, people spoke about Operation Lantern as the spark that had set off a new era of accountability across the state and beyond. Danielle didn't stay in the spotlight. She never wanted it. After the last hearing, after the last guilty plea, after the last emergency election, she stepped back into the shadows she had come from, not to hide, but to watch. To guard. Marcus stayed close, always a half step behind her, like a silent sentinel. Denise Hampton moved on to become a federal judge, carrying forward the torch of uncompromising justice in her own way. Operation Lantern continued, no longer under Danielle's direct command, but alive, thriving, a network of watchers and fighters in every corner of the country. Danielle herself found refuge where the noise couldn't follow on a battered piece of farmland miles outside the city, where the wind spoke in whispers and the earth remembered things people forgot too easily. She spent her mornings tending stubborn soil, her afternoons reading reports not meant for public eyes, her nights training the next generation quietly, methodically, never allowing the fire to dim. But peace, she knew, was only ever a pause between storms. It came one rainy evening, with a knock at the door that didn't sound like a stranger's. When Danielle opened it, Marcus stood there, soaked to the bone, face tight in a way she hadn't seen since the old days. No words at first. Just the heavy silence of bad news carried across miles. "They're rebuilding," he said finally, voice low, cutting through the patter of rain on the porch roof. "New names. Same rot. Different mask." Danielle didn't ask how he knew. She had taught him how to see it. Instead, she stepped aside, let him in, poured coffee so black it was nearly violent. They sat at the rough kitchen table, the same table where she had mapped battles long past, and Marcus laid out a battered file folder between them. She flipped through it quickly: photos, donation trails, new shell companies, judges with too clean records, politicians funded by shadows that smelled all too familiar. It wasn't just coming back. It was mutating, learning from the wounds Danielle had carved into it, growing smarter, quieter, hungrier. "They think people have forgotten," Marcus said, his voice a rough scrape. "They think time erases everything." Danielle closed the folder softly, staring out the window into the darkness beyond. She didn't speak for a long moment. She let the weight of it settle into her bones the way fire settles into embers, not dying, only waiting. Finally, she turned back, her voice steady, unflinching. "Then we remind them." She stood, grabbing her old backpack from the hook by the door, sliding the weight of purpose across her shoulders like an old, familiar coat. Marcus rose with her, no orders needed, no plans spoken aloud. They didn't need speeches anymore. They didn't need permission. They had each other. They had the truth. And once again, Danielle Rivers was moving toward the fire, not away from it. Because the truth isn't a war you win once. It's a war you fight every day. And Danielle Rivers wasn't done. Not yet, not ever. Justice isn't given. It's fought for by those who refuse to bow, even when the system was built to erase them. Danielle Rivers stood not just against corruption, but against a legacy of racial injustice. Her fight proved a simple, powerful truth: one voice, armed with courage, can ignite a revolution that no hate can silence.